begin, I'd like to welcome everyone on behalf of the Center for Latin American Studies here at Berkeley and on behalf of the Berkeley Law School where we are recording this event. It's a real honor to be here in the fourth of a series on inequality that the Center for Latin American Studies has done this semester. This is titled Inequality in the Americas. Let me tell you a little bit about the format and then introduce our speakers. The format will be each speaker will speak for about 15 minutes. Then they will ask each other a question. Then we will open it up to questions from the internet and questions in the audience here. We are asking for written questions. Please keep them short and simple and pass them to your right. The issue of inequality has emerged as one of the central political issues in the United States. It is also a critical issue throughout Latin America and in Colombia. In a way, it's a bit fitting that we're conducting this seminar today in a mock courtroom in the Berkeley Law School. We even have a jury box, but the real jurors aren't simply in this room. They're in Antioquia, in Colombia. They're in the country of Colombia. They're across Latin America. They're certainly in California and across the United States. We've spoken this semester about inequality in this series, but in a very real way, what we've been talking about is hyper-inequality, given the extent and the impact, certainly of what's taking place in the United States, and much of the impact, of course, in Latin America as well. The impact of inequality on issues related to economic growth is a very real one. The impact related to mobility is critical. And ultimately, the impact on the ability to have a democratic society is an important part of the mix. So we very much look forward to these presentations and to your questions and the discussion afterwards. Let me begin by introducing Governor Sergio Fajardo, who was elected governor of Antioquia, economically the most important province of Colombia, earlier this year. As a mayor of Medellín from 2003 to 2007, he received international recognition for his innovative and effective policies. He holds a Ph.D. in mathematics from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Governor Fajardo, welcome.
Hello, glad to be with you.
And we are here in Berkeley with Professor Emmanuel Saez, who's a professor of economics here at Berkeley and directs the Center for Equitable Growth at UC Berkeley. Among his many honors, he was awarded the John Bates Clark Medal by the American Economics Association in 2009 and a MacArthur Fellowship for his research on income inequality in 2010. I would mention that he was quoted in today's column in the New York Times by Paul Krugman, but that's such a frequent occurrence, we don't have to mention that. But we're going to begin with Professor Emmanuel Saez, and then we will go to Governor Fajardo.
Thank you very much, Professor Scheiken. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here tonight for this dialogue on inequality and income concentration across the Americas with Governor Fajardo. So today I want to give you an overview of work we've done as a collective research endeavor with many other scholars, evidence on income concentration. So, as you all know, free market economies generate substantial economic growth, but they also generate substantial inequality. And indeed, the main criticism you can make to capitalist economies is the fact that they create a lot of inequality, and that generate issues. An example would be political instability. Indeed, in Latin America, one of the impediments to growth in many of those countries has been political instability generated really at the root because of the issue of unequal distribution of economic resources. So this raises two important issues for economists. First, measuring and understanding inequality. So I will show you charts today about what we've researched and what we know about inequality and what factors drive inequality. And then in the second part of the talk, I want to discuss the public policy problem. That is, should the government reduce inequality using redistributive policies, and is this effective? What is the evidence? So let me start by introducing a collective research effort called the Top Incomes Database. So this is really the fruit of a collective effort where we've gathered data from many countries using income tax statistics to construct series of income concentration over time using the tax statistics source. So you can see that today in red, over 20 countries have been studied already, and this is an ongoing project. So this started with my co-author, Thomas Piketty, who first studied France, and then we did a study in the United States that has been indeed widely cited in the press. So let me just show you a couple charts from the United States to give you a sense of what this project is about. So a simple way to measure inequality is to measure income concentration. That is, ask the question, what share of total income do various groups at the top of the distribution get? So here is a chart showing you the share of total income that accrues to the top 10% families in the US since 1917. So for almost 1 century, and everything that I will discuss here will be pre-tax. So what we are interested in here is really inequality as the market creates it before the government does redistribution, through taxation and then transfer programs. So what is striking in this chart is the wide variation over time in income concentration. So you can see that before World War II, the US had a pretty high level of income concentration with the top 10% capturing almost half of total income, then a precipitous drop during World War II, and then for 30 years after World War II, a much lower level of income concentration with the top 10% getting only in the low 30s. But then what is striking in this graph is what has happened in the last 30 years, where you see that there has been a dramatic increase again in income concentration, so that in recent years, the US has a level of pre-tax income concentration that is actually as high as it was at the beginning of the 20th century. The next thing I want to say about the US is that this phenomenon of a large increase in income concentration has been really concentrated at the very top of the distribution. So a simple way to see this is to break down the top 10% into 3 groups. The top 1% in black, the next 4% in blue, and the next 5% in red. And so you see that of the big increase in income concentration, almost everything has come from the top 1%. And the higher you go in the distribution, so if you take this time the top 0.1%, the increase has been astonishing. From 3%, they now capture something like 10% of total income. So even though they are a minuscule group at the very top of the distribution, they matter a lot for the aggregate distribution of income. So the reason why those numbers matter is they actually change the view you might have about the growth overall, the way you view the economic performance of the United States. That is, if I take a simple example here, for the recent period from 93 to 2010, average real income growth per family has been 14% in real terms, so at a relatively low level of growth. But if I exclude the top 1%, that is the growth for the bottom 99% falls to 6.4% total over that 17-year period. This is cash, market income, pre-tax. So you can see that another way to read those numbers is that the top 1% has really captured about half of economic growth. So let me give you some international perspective. That is, what do we see for other countries? So if I start in this chart with the English-speaking countries, that is adding the United Kingdom and Canada to the US chart, you can see that actually all three English-speaking countries have followed more or less the same pattern. This is the top 1% share in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada. It's a U-shape for all three countries. Granted, the increase in income concentration in Canada and the UK has not been as large as in the United States, but still, it's striking how parallel those curves look. So you might ask, then maybe it's something universal that we see in all countries. Actually, this is not the case. That is now, if I switch to continental Europe and Japan, what is striking is that those countries do have a very high level of income concentration. It's the same scale as before. In the first part of the 20th century, they do experience a big drop in income concentration, related to their history. But then what is striking is that in the recent period, they do not experience nearly as large an increase in income concentration. So this evidence is very important to show you that it cannot be something like technology, that is something that all countries experience, that determine really the level of inequality, because all those countries have had more or less the same technological progress. It must be technology, if technology plays a role, coupled with how institutions and government policies interact with the economic system. So as we are in this dialogue with the Americas, let me show you a little bit of evidence now about some developing countries, including actually Colombia, for which a study was recently done. So if you look at the recent period here, I've put in black the United States, Colombia is in green, and then I've put Argentina in red and South Africa in blue. The overall lesson is that developing countries have very high levels of income concentration. That you can see it in this graph. Indeed, Colombia beats the United States, but what is striking here is that the United States is actually within that group. It doesn't have a notably lower level of income concentration than those developing countries. Another thing I should say is that, of course, for developing countries, it's hard to measure precisely the level of income concentration because the source, the tax statistics, are not as reliable due to tax evasion, tax avoidance, etc. So the fact that Colombia still appears to have a higher level of income concentration than the US means that indeed there, the concentration of income must be extremely high. And it's interesting also to see for a country like Argentina is that the level of income concentration does fluctuate a lot with the political development actually in those countries. So now, briefly, I want to say, a few things about public policy. So if it's not technology that determines, fully the level of income concentration, what about policy? And the most obvious one, or the one we've studied, are taxation, that is progressive taxation. So here, I want to discuss how taxation and progressive taxation affects the distribution of pre-tax market income. That is, what I'm interested in here is not just the fact that naturally, if the rich pay more, they have less disposable income. I want to understand how taxation shapes the distribution of market income even before taxes. So that's why in this chart, I've put the top 1% income share for the US that you've seen before. And then I've added in red a measure of the progressivity of the tax system, which is the top marginal tax rate from a scale to 0 from 100. So as you know, if you followed the debate, on the fiscal cliff and how the rich should be taxed, that now the tax rate is 35%, and there is a big debate for whether we should bring it back up to 39.6%, the way it was during the Clinton administration. But what I want to show you in this graph is how small that difference that we are fighting about is relative to the historical enormous variation that the US has experienced. So you see, before 1980, the top tax rate was over 70%, for a period of 40 years. But more important, when you see that graph, those two charts put together, you can see that there is obviously a negative relationship between the two. That is, when top tax rates are very high, even the pre-tax level of income concentration is fairly low. And in reverse, when the top tax rates come down, the pre-tax income increase significantly. So the key question to address there is whether this is a good thing. That is, whether, as conservatives argue, the fact that you lower the tax rate gives more incentives for the rich to work harder, develop business, et cetera, and whether this is good for the economy, or whether, it's more the left view, for example, of the Occupy Wall Street movement, that effectively when the rich do well, that actually comes at the expense of the bottom 99%. So before turning, it's hard just with the experience of one country to conclusively say something, but still in the US, what is striking is how the economic success of the top 1% versus the bottom 99% really are like mirror images. Namely, if you look at the period, say, after the Great Depression, 1933 to 1973, here I've put on this axis how the bottom 99% incomes increased and how the top 1% income increased, from a base 100 in 1913. And so what is striking is that in this period of very high tax rates, bottom 99% incomes increase relatively fast, while top 1% incomes increase much more slowly. In contrast, when you see the top tax rate coming down, then of course the top 1% income increase extremely fast during the last 30 years, but that growth in top 1% income comes at the same time where there is a big slowdown in the growth of the bottom 99% income. So the bottom line from this very simple chart is that when the top 1% does well, the bottom 99% does poorly, and conversely. At least that's what the US record suggests. Just from that simple chart, of course, from that to conclude, that there is a causality is much more difficult. But let me finish giving you some international evidence using against the database we've constructed. The first thing is that across countries, there is definitely a very strong correlation between how much a country has cut its top marginal tax rates from 1960 to the present, and how well the top 1% has done. That is, how much the top 1% income share has increased. So the US is here, that cut the top tax rate enormously and has had a big increase in the top 1% income concentration. But you see that overall the countries are more or less aligned along a diagonal, showing you that there is indeed a very strong link. And indeed, it's hard to find any other variable that is as closely correlated. So the US evidence is consistent. It's reflective of a broader pattern. If you cut tax rates at the top, the pre-tax market income of the top 1%er is going to increase. Just to finish, again, is this a good thing for the economy or not? If you look this time at the relationship, the growth experience since 1960 of those countries by how much they cut top marginal tax rate, there is no clear relationship. That is, it's not the case that the US or the UK have grown faster than other countries here in Europe that haven't changed their top tax rate policy that much, and that's even adjusting for initial level of economic development, that is 1960 GDP. So to summarize it, there is clear evidence that tax progressivity plays a key role in shaping the pre-tax market income distribution. It's hard to find evidence when you look systematically at the data that this has an impact on economic growth. That is, at this point of the research, you would say that top tax rate policy doesn't seem related to economic growth. So it seems really that then it plays a role in the distribution without necessarily affecting growth. This is obviously a key policy issue, so I'm glad to have given you my thoughts and big evidence from our research.
Thank you, Professor Saez, for a fascinating presentation. I should mention that we are video casting this live around the world, and it will also be on the website for the Center for Latin American Studies this Wednesday at noon. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Governor Fajardo.
Can you hear me well there?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so just a second. I'm going to put up my presentation here. And, wait. So now I'm going to talk about inequality from a governor's point of view. My name is Sergio Fajardo. I'm the governor of Antioquia in Colombia. Let me, to begin with, locate you geographically where we are. So if I manage to move this, there we go. You may recall, but if you don't, that this is a good opportunity to learn about it. Colombia is at the top of South America, right at the intersection with Central America, with Panama, which used to be ours, but I'm not going to talk about that today. So we are located at a very special geographical position in South America, and Antioquia is right at that intersection with Central America. You see, that's the map of my state. As Harry said, Antioquia is, I would say, the most important state in Colombia. We have 125 municipalities, and Antioquia is the crowdest department, that's what we say, state in Colombia. That's the map of Antioquia. It's very difficult to explain it from there, from the picture, but we have 9 regions, very unequally distributed with regard to all sorts of that you can think of distribution. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about inequality in Antioquia, explaining our context to begin with, because the problems that we are facing, unfortunately for us, are more complicated than just inequality. So let me put it this way. In our political movement, we are in politics, and our decision is to work on the solution of 3 problems. Inequality. We have inequality among people and between regions within our state. We face a very difficult problem that I'm sure you are aware of, violence. We have had violence for a few decades in Colombia, and that's a key problem that we have to work on. And together with violence, we have a culture of illegality, which includes as a main chapter corruption. These 2 problems, in addition to inequality that is throughout Latin America, as Professor Saez said, Colombia is, with Haiti, the most unequal country in Latin America. So, in Antioquia, within Colombia, is perhaps the most unequal region. So, in Latin America, we have inequality throughout the continent, but we have two more conditions: violence and the culture of illegality, those associated with narco traffic and the guerrillas that we have had in our country for, I would say, 50 years now. So the solution that we propose for those problems is our model of development, which is called Antioquia la más educada, which means Antioquia the most educated. That's the statement that captures the essence of what we do in politics and what we do in Antioquia. So what I'm going to tell you is how we are doing it here in my state, and I'm going to explain you the best way I can do it. So the key thing is we make education the engine of the transformation of our society. That's the key political point that we have been building in Colombia for the last 13 years. As Harry said, I am a mathematician. I didn't belong to the world of politics. I used to be a full professor at the University of Los Andes in Bogota. But with a group of friends, we decided that we were going to get involved in politics due to a basic reason. We were tired of saying how things should be done. And it took us a while, but we finally came up understanding and accepting that politicians are the ones that make the most important decisions in society. So we decided to get into politics, looking for power in order to transform our society, making education the engine of such transformation. This project began when I was elected mayor of Medellín in the year 2003. The problems that we were working on were exactly the same. The answer was Medellín, the most educated. And I'll have to explain, let me take a couple of minutes to explain how to make education the engine of the transformation of a society. We face a few problems. One, which is, as I write it down, a trivial statement. Everywhere, all politicians will repeat, education is the most important issue for a society. Education is the key for the transformation of all societies. But that's very easy to say in the middle of a campaign, but it's very difficult to see taken into practice in a democratic society. So that trivial statement, you get applauses for it, but when you get to power, you get into trouble, because the second statement that I have there says, which I claim is a false, between quotation mark statement, education is a long-term project. But in Colombia, we don't know, and we know nothing about long-term projects, so it doesn't exist. So once you get into power, education is said that is crucial to the development of the country, but we have never bet on education as a key issue for our society. For us, education in the 21st century is education in the traditional sense. You have to put together science plus technology plus innovation plus entrepreneurship and plus culture. So let me summarize what I have said. We live in the most unequal country together with Haiti in Latin America, in the Americas. We are facing three problems: inequality, violence, and the culture of illegality. When I say we, is the political party that I belong to, a civic movement that we created in Medellín 13 years ago, has the objective to make education the key for transforming the society. And what does this have to do with inequality? I have not a doubt that whichever path you take in order to work on inequality, at least in Colombia, it has to go through education. The door of opportunities, the first step has to be education understood in the sense that I mentioned there. So let me present a graphic that will show you how we do things here. I don't know how you can read it there, but let me say, begin on the left-hand side. On the top it says regions. We have, as I said, we had 9 regions in Antioquia. There is a central region where Medellín is located, is a metropolitan area that is powerful. We have plenty of problems in Medellín in the metropolitan area, but compared to the other regions, as you move away from that central part of the state, you get regions that are poorer and poorer with plenty of problems. So the way we work on, and this is a very simple way of explaining it, for each region of our state, we look at the potential that that region has. The potential is associated with the economic possibilities that you have there. For example, something very important for us, which is biodiversity, the cultural traditions that we have in that region. For those regions associated with a particular potential, we find the productive activities. For example, let me say one more thing and then I'll give you an example. But whenever we write productive activities, we come up with a question that we always ask. Where do science and technology get involved with those productive activities? Let me give you an example. In Colombia, we produce coffee. Antioquia is the biggest producer, let me say it correctly. We produce my English is failing me now. Anyway, we produce a lot of coffee. And we are facing a challenge. Right now, in the coffee markets worldwide, it is not a generic name as it used to be, Colombian coffee. Now, we are betting on special coffees, quality coffees that they come from a specific origin. In Antioquia, out of the 125 municipalities that we have, in 94 of them, we had produced coffee. So our challenge is we are going to produce the best coffee in the world, coming from Antioquia, town by town. So in order to do that, we incorporate research on scientific research regarding, for example, the quality of the soils, the altitude where we produce the coffee, the way it has to be produced. We bring in all technology tools so that the new coffee producers would get the latest technology associated with the scientific knowledge that we have here in our state in order to produce the best coffee in the world. That's a challenge that we have. But all that, we translate those activities into the language of innovation and entrepreneurship. There is not a single kid in the countryside in Antioquia who wants to be a peasant. That's part of the 20th century. We have to be able to come up with innovation and entrepreneurship programs so that we get our kids involved, they get science and technology, as I mentioned, as a key tool in those projects that we have. Immediately, once you talk about innovation and entrepreneurship, then you have to ask, what's the higher education that we are providing to our kids so that they could be innovators or entrepreneurs? And then immediately, we have to go back to school and look at our high school and basic school and see what's the quality of education that we are giving our kids so that they can go to higher education, get prepared to innovate and to start their entrepreneurship programs. And then we end up at the other side of the column that I have in the graphic. We talk about how we take care of kids. So as opposed to the traditional sense where you say, well, education you have to get with kids, with a good start, for example, we look from one side to the other. What we have in the regions, what is the potential, and we move from each one of those sides, and we, at the center, we converge to innovation and entrepreneurship. And we have to have some conditions in order to be competitive, which has we have to work on the quality of our roads. We have very poor roads in Colombia in general, which make us very, it doesn't allow to be as competitive as we would like. We are working on a project which is called Digital Antioquia, which means bring all the internet associated methods in order to communicate and get involved with the world. And we have a big program about schools construction. So that's the basic setting, and that's the way we fight inequality. Just to finish up my initial presentation, then I'll show you how you manage to make education the key of the social transformation, given this panorama, this view that I have given you, and it will explain you how we make sure that in every single corner of Antioquia, every single person in Antioquia understand that education is the key. And here is the last figure that I have for you. Unfortunately, I thought that I would be able to point at the graphic, but bear with me and let me explain you what I have written in there. At the center is Antioquia, la más educada. What we build, and this is crucial in order to fight inequality, is hope. And hope is built beginning with a key word that is underlying all what we do in politics, which is called dignity. For every single human being, we are equally dignified as human beings and equally valuable. And then if you have dignity, and for every single human being, you are able to trace a path so that they can see that they can follow a path in society, that way we build hope. So I'm going to move around this graphic. I apologize because I should number them, but I'll begin with a crucial set of activities that show you how we make sure that education becomes the first step in the social transformation, and it's absolutely necessary in order to fight inequality, which we have, as I said, in a very, very high level in Colombia. So for example, for each municipality, remember, we have 125 municipalities in Colombia. With each municipality, we sign with the mayor of the city and with all the the civil society there, what we call a pact for quality education. We are talking here about the mountains, very far away from Medellín, very poor places, but to each school, to each municipality, we bring the message that says quality of education is the tool in order to transform ourselves. In Antioquia, I think this is true for Colombia. If we move within a legal path and we bet on the talent that we have, which we have plenty of talent, then we can get as far as we want. So every municipality in Antioquia has a quality pact for education. Each school in Antioquia, the poorest one, has today a quality pact, which means we have a baseline. We say where we are, what are the difficulties that we have in our programs, where are the problems that we are facing within each school, and then we write it down and then have a path that we're going to follow step by step. Next month, what is going to be better than we had what we had before, and so on. So for example, we have created the Mathematics Network of Antioquia. We get together all the teachers of mathematics in Antioquia. Our mathematics are not good in Antioquia, but by means of the web and all the means that we have been developing through digital means, then we get all of them together. So kids get to the web, teachers get to the web, we produce material with the best people around mathematics here, and then we are improving the quality of mathematics in Antioquia. We do the same thing for language. We also have a program for the civic competency. I forgot how to mention it, but anyway. So that's a first step. Then and I would move to the upper left hand, we are going to develop our regions. What we are doing, in a sense, is similar to what was done in the United States many years ago. We are going to have the university as the key institution around which we are going to develop our regions. Because it happens that the best kids that we have in our regions, they come to Medellín to study, to go for higher education. Then they never go back to their original place, and in our regions, we lack the talent that we have plenty of, but they leave the place, and we don't address the potential that we have in those regions. So we are building the University of Antioquia throughout the state in 5 new places, and this university, for example, would be the equivalent of the University of California, of the University of Wisconsin. I went to Madison, and we had the University of Wisconsin throughout the state. Well, we are doing the same thing with the University of Antioquia. And together with that, we have a program, a massive program for education for work, so that kids, once they finish high school, they have something to do afterwards, because most kids today, they finish high school, if they ever finish, and they sit in the street, at the corner of their street, and they look forward, and what they see in front of them is no opportunities. So we are building those opportunities, and we have a program for technical, and some aspects of practical work related to the potential that we have in those regions. And in order to put those programs forward, we have a massive program of fellowships for higher education and technical and technological education throughout the regions of our state where we have very poor people, talented, but they cannot attend school because they have no money. So we are working on that program so no one in Antioquia with talent would be sitting on a corner in their hometown seeing what happens in front of them. And in Colombia and in Antioquia in particular, there is plenty of bad things crossing in front of them. So once we have that, in each town we are building what we call a parque educativo, educational park. We have to get places where our kids and the community can get together. And those places where we are putting a new public space where they can relate to the world. In those spaces, we have the programs for teachers. There is the room for teachers. We have the room for entrepreneurship. We have the room called Digital Antioquia so that they connect to any part of the world. They could be watching this conference that we have today from any town in Antioquia. That's what we are going to do. And then we continue and bringing up different activities so that our kids see a path. That's crucial in order to fight inequality, because in a country like ours, in the situation that we have, where we have inequality, we have, when they see no path to follow, and in front of them you have the criminal activities associated with narco-trafficking or guerrillas, it's very easy that they could follow that path. For example, we continue doing things like this. We have a beautiful contest in Antioquia, which is called Talented Young Women. As opposed to beauty contests, beauty has been a very prized attribute here in Colombia for women. And we are betting on the development of women as part of the development of our society. So for every activity that we have, we come up with an activity that shows where talent goes. For example, as I said, talented young women coming from all over of Antioquia, and you will be very surprised, very excited, very happy to see the talent that our women have, but we have to bring them up so that society will see them. And just to finish up with another activity that we have the Knowledge Olympiads, the Olympics in Antioquia. Kids that never thought that they could ever go on studying, that they never thought that there could be an opportunity for them in life. We come up with this contest, and it was marvelous to see how they shine when we give them an opportunity. We put all these things together, and at the end, what we are building is hope, as I said, recognizing dignity as the crucial issue that we share as human beings, building a path for every single human being in the Department of Antioquia, and that's the way that in the context where I'm working on, because right now in Colombia, in the Congress in Colombia, we are discussing a tax reform, as the professor mentioned before, but at the local level, at the regional level, this is what we are doing, and I'm very proud to present it to you, and well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor Fajardo, for a fascinating presentation as well. Now, do you have a question that you'd like to ask Professor Saez?
Yeah, I was thinking about something that is usually repeated. If you don't tax the rich, they have the incentive to create more jobs. I want to ask the professor if he knows in any developing country, a country where that statement is true.
Thank you very much for the question. Yes, so that's the usual argument. If you tax the rich, they will work less or flee, etc. It's very hard to find, I have no good example of a situation where you've taxed the rich less and they've really worked more, created more businesses. But what the experience of the world is full of is cases where you haven't taxed them in a smart way so that effectively they manage to avoid the taxes, that were targeting them by fleeing, by putting, their wealth outside of the country. So it's not only a matter, of saying I'm going to tax the rich more. You have to be smart about it. That is, recognize what are the limitations, and the limitations of a developing country are not the same as a country as the United States. But if you use best practice and the limits, I'm convinced there is a way, to increase the tax burden on upper incomes without hurting entrepreneurship and growth.
Okay, thank you.
We have Professor Saez, a question for Governor Fajardo.
I wanted to commend the governor for putting emphasis on education, which is indeed central to a development. And indeed, many studies, including in richer countries like the United States, have shown that you cannot trust solely, the private agents, that is people. It's not enough for people to see, high education is going to give me a higher income, therefore I'm going to pursue it. In reality, there is not much of a drive, without a massive government intervention. That is, in all the countries, that they developed, and they've improved their education, it has always been coming from the government, making education more affordable, advertising it heavily. So I am totally in line with you, that it is indeed the role of the government to make education better. And as we are having, here in the state of California, this debate, California was really one of the best states in the country for higher education in the post-war period, developing, the University of California. Unfortunately, in recent years, funding has been cut, so that now there are less seats, for higher education in the state of California. And unfortunately, we economists can predict, that this is not going to be good for the development of California. And I was struck in your presentation that, except at the very end, you never mentioned funding. And I wanted to ask you, do you have to fight for funding, from the central government, or do you raise funding, through local taxes? How does this factor, in your grand plan of improving education in your state?
Right, thank you. Let me say something first. In Colombia, we have a private education system which is of higher quality than the public education system that we have. The elites go to the private system and they have no problem. So that's one of the main reasons for inequality in Colombia. And what we are doing here is we are betting on public education. And our challenge is that a kid, regardless of the social conditions, they receive as high quality education as a kid going to a private school would receive. And that's the way we designed this intervention, and it has to do with inequality. Now, the Colombian government hasn't had actually for decades education as a top issue, as a key issue for our country. In Antioquia, we have some resources. And what we are doing is we are putting our own resources from Antioquia, we are investing and that's what politics is all about. That's what we came into power. All those resources that we have for investing in our state, we are using them mostly for education. So what I said there are some resources from the central government, but what I'm saying there, we are the only ones who are doing it in Colombia. And whatever peso that we have, we mostly bring it to this program that I have mentioned. So Antioquia has some richness compared to other states in Colombia. And if you add to that we don't steal a single peso, money you can use money in a much more effective way. But that's our money, it's our program, it's our dream, and it's our politics.
Well, there's a lot. Thank you for these introductory questions. Manuel, please stay up here. We have quite a few questions from the audience here in Berkeley, and we have quite a number of questions that we received over the internet. I'm going to start with the question over the internet, but before that, one very brief comment. One of the things that's so fascinating about this series is we are looking at two different countries, two different regions, two different levels of development, and a theme that is critical to both, and providing perspectives from each of the regions to address some of these core issues. So the question from the internet I'm going to start with is from Detroit, Michigan, and it's from Bob King, the president of the United Auto Workers Union in the United States. The UAW represents, of course, auto workers, but it also represents 12,000 graduate students who teach at the University of California. His question to both of you is, how important are strong unions and a strong labor movement to ending poverty and inequality? So, Manuel, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go to Governor Fajardo.
Okay, I mean, that's a very big question. What is certainly true, you know, if you look at the evidence, is that the rise of inequality and the stagnation of middle-income jobs has come at the same time as the demise of the unions. That is, that the unions were losing power. Indeed, it is also the case that middle-income workers were not seeing nearly as large income gains. So for me, I'm convinced that unions play definitely a role, you know, in the distribution of a production. That is, even though, you know, we have beautiful models in economics that tell you, you know, how surplus is distributed between, you know, labor and capital. In the real world, there are enough friction that in the end, you know, to the distribution of the share of the pie is not going to be given to you, you know, by a pure market mechanism, and unions play a role in this.
Governor Fajardo.
In Colombia, very few workers belong to unions. And I agree with Professor Saez that we need the strong unions, but we need a special leadership from unions to understand the transition that we are going through in this world right now. And there are some of them who have not understood the change that has happened in society, and that affects negatively unions. I believe that we need unions, we need more workers affiliated to unions, but we have to understand the nature of economic development these days. Unions have been and should be crucial fighting for decent jobs so that people get paid well for what they do decently, and we need those leaders who understand this, and I'm understanding that we are moving into a service society in many aspects, that the type of contracts that we have these days are different, but regardless of that, we always have to keep in mind that we have to have decent jobs and we have to take care of people, but that requires a new leadership and many answers that perhaps economists, as the professor, can provide us new models for that type of reality that we are facing.
This question was addressed to Sergio Fajardo, but I'm going to ask you both because I think the question really applies in the United States as well as Colombia. And why don't we start with Professor Saez? How does inequality affect political competition in the United States? What are the political dimensions of this rise in inequality?
So as we've seen in the recent election, there is a lot of campaigning going on, and that is very expensive. So indeed, you need funds, and obviously, you know, if there is more income concentration, the top, you know, of the distribution can have more influence because it has more money to spend on elections. So perhaps, you know, this year we've seen, you know, that perhaps money is not everything. Definitely not. That is, you can have a lot of money coming from the top and still lose an election. But generally, yes, more resources, you know, at the top means that they will have more influence on the political process.
I think in Colombia, at least, due to the inequalities and the poverty that we have, people who get into politics to work for their own interest then become what we call clientelists, which is paying for votes. In the United States, they have these huge amounts of money on TV commercials attacking each other. And in Colombia, we have huge amounts of money buying votes for poor people. And that's the entrance door to corruption, which I think we have. And that's one of the reasons people in Colombia don't trust politicians, because they pay for their votes, they say, or they assume many times, I already paid you, and then once they get into power, many, not all of course, and from the different parties, but they work for their own pocket. So inequality is used by corrupt politicians to reduce the richness that we have into small pieces to the poorest people, paying for votes and corrupting the political system.
Here's another question for both, and we'll start with Professor Saez. Do you think there is an optimal way to reduce inequality without altering incentives for upward mobility?
Yes, and actually Governor Fajardo has given the answer, you know, access to high quality of education for all. I think this is really the most fundamental aspect of it. That is, you want talent comes from everywhere in society, and you want that talent to be able to express itself fully. And for that to succeed, it needs to be the case that where you're coming from, that is, what is the wealth of your family and your background, doesn't have too much of an influence on what you will end up doing.
Governor Fajardo.
Well, I agree with Professor Saez, and let me add something. In the United States, you have a really big middle class, even though the problems that you are going through these days. We have a very small middle class, and we have to increase the middle class in Colombia. And the only way to do that is to begin with education, and high quality education, regardless of the social condition of people. That's the only path to move forward, upwards. Now, one of the problems that we face, which is very complex, which is associated, for example, with narco traffic, and the way narco-traffic offered a shortcut to people so they don't have to go through the work of education in order to have a possibility of becoming, for example, a middle class. And that's a big challenge that we have, because we are facing illegality that offers a quick reward, and we are working through education that takes an effort, takes a particular way of understanding development, but that challenge is the one that we are facing in Antioquia. Sometimes we are in trouble and we have difficulties, but that's the way to go.
Another question to both, starting with Professor Saez. To what extent can states alleviate income inequality? Or is this something that ultimately has to primarily be done on a national level?
I mean, on the tax side and tax progressivity, I think that really has to be done at the federal level. That is, I mean, a state like California can have an income tax that is somewhat more progressive. Indeed, there was a referendum to vote, for higher taxes on the very rich, precisely to fund actually education and higher education, and that proposition passed a couple weeks ago. But at the state level, it's hard to do tax progressivity because there is so much mobility within a country. So there is a limit on how much California could tax upper income before seeing real detrimental mobility effects. On other policies such as education, where the United States has had a pretty decentralized system for K-12, but also higher education, I think states can play a very big role. And I mean, I think we've seen, again, in the history of California, when California decided to put a lot of public funding, in public education, there was a surge in higher education, college completion rates, et cetera. But again, at the state level, you really have that trade-off. That is, if you want a better education system, you need to be willing to put the resources as well.
Governor Fajardo.
In Colombia, the tax policies belong to the central government. We have no ability at the state level to introduce a reform like that through our assembly, the state assembly. Now, we have some resources, and as we explained here previously, we are betting on education, and we are putting a lot of money into human talent and the way we can develop and change our society through education, plus science, technology, and all these issues that I mentioned. Now, we have plenty of needs, and we have to balance, because if I go to a municipality in Colombia, in Antioquia, say we have a town with 10,000 inhabitants. If I go there, the mayor, the first thing that he will tell me is, please build the roads. They won't say anything, but please build the roads. We want to have good roads. So in order to be good leaders, we have to manage to understand some of the basic needs, very basic needs that we have to address. And at the same time, we have to bet on people's talent, because the society transforms if you manage to touch people and make sure that they feel that they are respected and they can be the key issue, the key force in the transformation. Touching people, making sure that they realize that they have the talent, they have the power to be dignified as a human being is crucial. So we have to be able to handle attending basic needs, but that won't change society, because we can spend all the money that we want, and we have to spend a lot of money on those basic needs, but the transformation is when you bet on human beings and they feel dignified in spite of the social conditions where they were born or where they are growing.
We have time for one more question, and then I'd like to ask you both to give very brief concluding remarks. It doesn't have to be a summary, just one idea that you'd like to raise before we conclude. And the final question is from the internet. It comes from Santiago, Chile, from Kirsten Sandbrook, who is a professor at the University of Chile. She would like, and we'll start with Professor Saez on this, to an explanation of why a country such as Chile, which has been considered a successful model of development by most of the world for a long time now, why should Chile care about inequality? Neoliberal economists here for the last 20 years have kept the issue on the back burner. So.
I think Chile should care about inequality like any country cares about inequality. In the end, why do we all care about inequality? Why are we here discussing this? It is because people judge their situation or their success, how they feel about what they've achieved by comparing themselves to others next to them in society. That is, we don't live in a vacuum, you know, just looking at the absolute level of what you have. Like actually most economic models assume, you know, that vacuum. In reality, people care about how they do relative to others in society. So that means that in all societies, inequality will be an important issue, and that can become actually an explosive issue if inequality becomes too high. So that's why, again, even if a country growing quickly like Chile, but there are other examples, think about China or India, cannot ignore the issue of inequality. And actually, Chile is also a good example because it is the political turmoil they went through, you know, with the dictatorship of Pinochet, etc. It was at the core, you know, because of issues, because people had such strong feelings about issues of distribution.
Governor Fajardo.
Well, I think he explained it very well. Usually, society in principle, we are moving forward. And sometimes you explain to people and say, but remember how you were 20 years ago. That doesn't count. That excuse doesn't work. People, at least many in our societies, want to live better and happier. And society is transforming every year, and we have to take into account because we have higher aspirations, and there is a long way in order to have a fairer society. And that, I think, and I'm sure that that's part of the human spirit, always thinking that we can do better than what we are doing right now. And I'm glad that's the way it is.
Now we're going to have very brief, is there an idea, Governor Fajardo, you'd like to leave us with?
Well, that is a pleasure to be with you. I never thought I would be doing such a thing that as we are doing today. Thank you, Harry, Beatriz, Professor Saez, and all the people who are watching us and listening to us. This is marvelous. I think this world is exciting, even though we are going through difficult times and we have difficult problems ahead of us and in front of us in order to solve. This makes me happy, and I'm sure many interesting things are going to come out of this possibility of getting in touch the way we are doing it today. And I claim that from Latin America, you are going to be seeing in the years to come the most exciting ideas and the most exciting societies. So I'm proud as a Latin America, and little by little is our time to write history.
And before we go, to Professor Saez, I'd like to mention to you, this is not meant instead of coming to Berkeley. It is meant as a prelude to coming to Berkeley. For Professor Saez, it's not meant to not go to Columbia, but to get his attention about coming to Columbia. So Professor Saez.
Yes, thank you very much all for coming tonight. It was also a little bit of a strange experience for myself, but I was delighted to be able to have this dialogue with the audience and with an actual practitioner who was actually to make decisions and choose, you know, and give choose priorities and do things for the economic development of his state. I would say, as an economist, so it's great to see such entrepreneurship, you know, at the political level. And economists have made tremendous progress precisely studying experiences from smart policymakers who implement new things all around the world. So I hope that down the road in a few years, your state will be the laboratory that economists like myself will come to see what has worked.
Okay, good.
Before we conclude, I want to thank both of you. I know your schedules are horrible on both ends, and for taking the time to make this happen. And I'd like to thank the technical people at Berkeley who did this, the people at the Center for Latin American Studies who made this happen. So thank you. It's the beginning, not the end of a conversation.
Thank you.